While an insult or grievance can often be forgiven or forgotten, there are sometimes occasions when the passing of time only magnifies the feeling of anger and injustice, so that it seems as if the only suitable response is to take retribution on those who have wronged you. Such acts of revenge are usually limited to lashing out at the one person who has done you harm. However, history is littered with extreme and sometimes out of proportion examples of vengeance that often prove the saying that revenge is a dish best served cold. From a diplomatic insult that doomed millions to a noblewoman turned pirate, here are my choices for 5 of the most incredible and brutal acts of revenge in history. Number 5. The 47 Ronin. The tale of the 47 Ronin has become a popular subject for movies and novels. However, this incredible story of revenge is actually based on historical fact and perfectly demonstrates the samurai code of conduct that prized loyalty, courage, and honor above all else. The legend begins in 1701 when a young daimyo named Lord Naganori was selected by the shogun as one of several lords who would be given the task and honor of entertaining envoys from the emperor in modern-day Tokyo. Such a ceremonious task would require the young lord to comply with a whole host of elaborate etiquette, lest he make a mistake in protocol that would embarrass himself and, more importantly, the shogun. A powerful official and master of royal etiquette named Lord Kira was assigned to instruct Lord Naganori in the complex ways of Japanese royal protocol. However, the two men took an instant dislike to each other. Lord Kira expected a large and generous present, otherwise known as a bribe, from his new student in exchange for instruction in the mysterious arts of court etiquette. Despite such bribes being commonplace and widely expected, it seems as if Lord Naganori was unaware of this tradition, or simply unwilling to comply, as his meagre offering of a simple dried fish as a token gift greatly insulted Lord Kira, who went on to become uncooperative with the training and would frequently insult Lord Naganori and go to great efforts to publicly embarrass him. Such public shaming eventually became too much for Lord Naganori to bear, and in April of 1702, after one insult too many, he lashed out and attacked Lord Kira, drawing his sword and attempting to kill him. Although he only managed to inflict a minor wound upon Lord Kira's face before guards intervened, the very act of drawing a weapon within the shogun's castle, not to mention attacking one of the shogun's officials, was highly forbidden. There could be only one punishment for Naganori. He was ordered to commit ritual suicide. His lands were confiscated, his family ruined, and his loyal retainers were now deemed to be ronin, disgraced samurai without a lord, who were ordered by the shogun not to seek revenge for their master's death. Naganori's 300 samurai were divided on how to deal with this turn of events. Their oath of loyalty declared that they were duty-bound to avenge their lord's death, yet some favoured simply dispersing and living out their days as ronin, while others wished to defend the castle when government troops came to seize it, fighting to the death in the process. However, there was another way. Oishi, the man who had previously been their leader, urged his men to give up the castle without a fight, and began plotting revenge upon Lord Kira, the man who in their eyes was responsible for the death of their master. Of the 300 retainers, 46 decided to follow Oishi's plan, and the 47 men swore a secret pact to avenge their former master, knowing that even if they succeeded, their actions would likely result in their own deaths. Lord Kira was no fool, however, and suspected that the men might make a bid for revenge. His home was heavily guarded, and spies were dispatched to keep an eye on the men who might threaten his life. The 47 ronin knew that their only chance for success would be to lure him into a sense of false security, and thus an elaborate ruse was put into place. The 47 men seemingly gave up their old lives, becoming tradesmen and even monks, in a bid to trick Lord Kira into thinking that they were no longer a threat. Oishi went as far as to leave his wife, become a drunk and frequenter of brothels, portraying himself as a broken man, unconcerned with matters of revenge. Despite public appearances, the 47 ronin were busy plotting their attack, becoming familiar with the layout of Lord Kira's house and the routine of the men who guarded it. One of the ronin even married the daughter of the man who built the house in an effort to obtain its design plans. Weapons were secretly gathered, and after 2 years of meticulous planning and deception, the time to strike finally presented itself. After so much time had passed, Lord Kira had become convinced that the men posed no threat, and made the mistake of easing up on his house's defences. On Tuesday, January the 30th, 1703, the 47 ronin attacked. One group attacked the front gate, while the other assaulted the rear of the house. After a fierce battle, the defenders were overwhelmed. However, no sign of Lord Kira could be found. They scoured the house in search of their quarry, before eventually a man armed with a dagger was found hiding in the shadows. He refused to state his name, but the scar on his head from the attack he suffered 2 years ago betrayed his identity. Oishi gave Lord Kira the chance to die with honour by taking his own life. However, he refused to do so, remaining silent and trembling with fear. The men pinned Kira down, while Oishi cut off his head, using the same dagger that his master had used 2 years earlier to end his own life. The 47 Ronin's remarkable mission had succeeded, and revenge had finally been taken. The Ronin placed Kira's head on the grave of their deceased master, along with the dagger used to behead him, before surrendering to the authorities. The shogun found himself in a difficult position. This act of revenge had gained the men widespread support amongst the people, yet by defying his order not to seek revenge, they could not be allowed to live. Instead of being executed like common criminals, they were given the opportunity to take their own lives, and so 46 of the 47 Ronin committed ritual suicide. The 47th man had earlier been sent home to report news of the mission's success, and was eventually pardoned by the shogun, going on to live until the age of 87, before being buried alongside his former comrades. The 47 men once again reunited, where they lay to this day in front of the tomb of their former lord. Number 4. The Lioness of Brittany. Married to an important Breton noble, Jeanne de Clisson might have expected to live the pampered and comfortable life of a medieval noble lady. However, fate had a far different future in store for her. When the Duke of Brittany died with no male heir in 1341, the King of England and the King of France both saw an opportunity to expand their influence. Brittany held a strategic location between the two kingdoms and could prove a useful foothold for future military operations during the ongoing 100 Years' War. Two claimants to the Breton throne emerged, one backed by England, the other backed by France. The Breton War of Succession had begun, a conflict which would drastically alter Jeanne de Clisson's life. The de Clissons had sided with the French candidate for the Breton throne. However, Jeanne's husband Olivier soon found himself captured by English forces while valiantly defending the town of Vannes. In accordance with custom during this period, as Olivier was a nobleman, he was released by the English in exchange for payment of a ransom. Yet the unusually small ransom the English demanded for his release led the French king to suspect that Olivier was either working with the English or at least had sympathies for their cause. In January of 1343, a temporary truce was declared, and Olivier was invited to a tournament on French soil, along with several other noblemen. However, the invite was a trick. The French king had decided that Olivier was indeed a traitor, and had him arrested, taken to Paris, and put on trial for treason. The trial was a sham. However, Olivier was declared guilty and promptly beheaded. His body was hung on public display in Paris, while his severed head was sent back to Brittany and placed on a lance in the city of Nantes as a warning of the fate that lay in store for traitors, or just anyone who got on the wrong side of the French king. The execution was widely viewed as unjust, as no demonstration of reasonable guilt had been made, and the public display of Olivier's body was seen as unfitting for a nobleman and a final insult to his family, as this was treatment usually reserved for common criminals. Upon hearing the tragic news, his wife Jeanne was enraged by the perceived injustice and insult to her family. She travelled to Nantes with her 2 sons and forced them to see what had become of their father, his decomposing head on public display for all to see. She swore vengeance against the French king and immediately sold everything her family owned, using the funds to raise a force of men to unleash her wrath upon any French forces still stationed in Brittany. One by one, French castles and garrisons were assaulted by her war party, each time with every man massacred bar one, who would be allowed to leave so that he could report back to the French king who had killed his men and why. After several such massacres, she was eventually forced to flee across the Channel to England, where she was given a warm reception thanks to her ruthless attacks on their hated enemy. The English king equipped Jeanne and her men with 3 warships, which she planned to put to deadly use. She painted the ships black and dyed the sails red, so that any Frenchman unfortunate enough to encounter her would know the fate that awaited him, and by naming her flagship My Revenge, it was clear that money was not her main motivation. Her fleet immediately began patrolling the English Channel, preying on any French ships they came across. Her standard method of operation would be to capture a ship, loot it of anything of value to pay her men, before finally putting to death all but one of the crew, usually by personally beheading them with an axe. The sole survivor would return to France to inform the French king of what had taken place, and word of her killing spree soon spread, earning her the nickname the Lioness of Brittany, and causing French sailors to be ever fearful of encountering her dreaded warships, which became known as the Black Fleet. She terrorized the waters of the English Channel for 13 long and bloody years, during which time it's thought that she captured or destroyed as many as 100 French ships, potentially slaughtering as many as 3,000 French sailors in her savage quest for revenge. By 1356, it seemed as if her thirst for revenge had finally been quenched. Brittany was under English control, and the French king who had incurred her wrath so long ago had been dead for 6 years. She ended up marrying an English lieutenant, leaving her life of murder and plunder behind her to settle down and live out the remainder of her days in peace, before finally dying in 1359, no doubt secure in the knowledge that with so much blood shed, the scales had been balanced. Number 3. Operation Wrath of God. Held less than 30 years after the horrific events of World War II, the Israeli participation in the 1972 Munich Olympics held a special significance and was expected to be a memorable occasion. The Olympics certainly would be memorable, but not for the reasons that many had hoped. 11 members of the Israeli Olympic team were taken hostage and murdered by the Palestinian terror group called Black September. 5 of the 8 terrorists would later be killed by German police in a dramatic shootout. However, 3 were captured, only to be later released in accordance with the demands of hijackers who captured an airliner in October of the same year. The Israeli government's attitude when dealing with such terrorist tactics had always very much been an eye for an eye, and the campaign of revenge and terror that would be unleashed as the unofficial response to the massacre very much fit in with this philosophy. 2 days after the massacre, Israel bombed 10 PLO bases in Syria and Lebanon, and the government quickly created a secret group called Committee X to formulate their response to the murders. It was decided that the best way to deter future violence against Israel was to assassinate those responsible for the Munich massacre in a dramatic and public manner. Operation Wrath of God was born. A group of Mossad agents were given the task of hunting down and killing anyone suspected of being involved with the Munich massacre, and a list of targets was drawn up, which was rumoured to contain as many as 35 names, most of whom were known members of Black September and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The goal of the operation was not only revenge, but to terrorize Palestinian militants, and so the favoured method of assassination became using explosive devices, as this indicated that the killer had expertise and intended to kill, whereas a simple shooting could be incorrectly explained as a robbery gone wrong. Explosions also had the added bonus of receiving widespread media coverage, further spreading fear amongst anyone involved with the massacre. The first target was eliminated in Rome and was shot to death 12 times in an ambush. The next hit took place in France, where a PLO representative was killed after a bomb was detonated underneath his telephone. A Mossad agent called him and, after confirming his identity, sent a detonation signal down the telephone line, which caused the bomb to explode, mortally wounding the target. A third man was killed after a bomb placed under his bed was detonated, and the killing spree would continue for up to 20 years, with targets being eliminated with the use of bombs, shootings, and with one even being killed by being pushed under a London bus during rush hour. A hallmark of the operation was the use of letter bombs sent to Palestinian officials, as well as the publishing of obituaries in newspapers for PLO and Black September members who were still alive, as a stark warning of what was to come. Flowers would also be sent to a target's family hours before they were killed, with a condolences card attached which read, "A reminder we do not forget or forgive." The secretive nature of the missions means that assigning a body count to the operation is nearly impossible, yet several innocent people are known to have been caught in the crossfire. In 1973, a Moroccan waiter in Norway was shot dead after being mistaken for a Black September member. Despite these mistakes, the operation would continue, with the deadly reach of the Mossad agents spreading across the world in their ruthless campaign to avenge the 11 victims who were murdered in the 1972 Olympics. Number 2. Princess Olga of Kiev. Married to Igor of Kiev at some point in the early 10th century, Princess Olga seemed to be on course for a royal life of luxury. However, her life would take a much darker turn in 945 AD. Her husband had made his annual journey to collect a customary tribute from one of their vassal tribes, the Drevlians. However, wishing to enrich himself even further, he made the fatal mistake of attempting to extort a larger tribute than was required. For the Drevlians, such a degree of extortion was unbearable, and so Iger was captured and put to a grisly death, supposedly by being tied to tree trunks and torn in two. At the time of his death, Iger and Olga's son was just 3 years old, meaning that Olga would have to act as regent and ruler of Kievan Rus until her son was old enough to take the throne for himself. Seeing a woman take the throne, the Drevlians made the mistake of thinking that she would be weak and easy to usurp. In a brazen attempt to seize control of her kingdom, a delegation was sent to Kiev to propose that Olga marry the Drevlian prince Mal, thus making him the ruler of Kievan Rus. However, it seems Olga was determined to ensure that her son would one day take power. Enraged by her husband's death and wishing to preserve the throne for her young son, she began to formulate a plan for revenge that combined murderous fury with cold and calculated cunning. She sent word to the Drevlian delegation waiting outside the city gates that she would consider the marriage proposal, however wished to first honour the delegation in a public ceremony inside the city to be held the next day, to which her men would carry the Drevlians in their boats as a mark of respect. The Drevlians accepted this gesture and retired to their tents for the night, a night which Olga's men spent digging a deep ditch inside the city. When the next day arrived, the Drevlian delegation was carried inside the city in their boats as was promised, yet when they arrived at the castle courtyard, the boats and all the men inside them were cast into the deep ditches that had been dug the previous night. Olga peered into the trench at the Drevlians languishing in the ditch that would prove to be their grave, and asked if they found the honour to their taste. The ditch was then quickly filled in, burying alive the terrified men. The next phase of her plan involved destroying the best and brightest men the Drevlians had to offer. Concealing the fate of the earlier delegation, word was sent to Prince Mal, requesting that he send an entourage of his best men to accompany his future bride to his capital, where she would formally accept his offer of marriage. Prince Mal complied with the request, sending the best men he had under his command to Kiev. When the second delegation arrived in Kiev, Olga feigned courtesy, inviting them to bathe in the city's bathhouse before meeting with her, an offer which the weary men gladly accepted. However, once the men entered the bathhouse, they too would experience Olga's wrath. The door was promptly barred behind them, and the bathhouse set ablaze, burning alive everyone inside. With the most talented and able men Prince Mal had under his command now destroyed, Princess Olga launched Phase 3 of her plot. A funeral feast for her deceased husband was held at his grave, to which 5,000 Drevlians were invited as a gesture of goodwill. Olga's servants were instructed to ply the men with alcohol, and after they had become sufficiently drunk, her soldiers ruthlessly executed all 5,000. The Drevlians were now all but defenceless. Olga marched on their capital with her army to deliver the death blow, yet unusually offered peace for its now terrified inhabitants, so long as each house in the city would provide her with 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows. Happy with such a reasonable yet bizarre request, the Drevlians complied and handed over the birds. That night, Olga ordered her soldiers to attach a piece of sulphur wrapped inside cloth to the birds' feet before releasing them. All of the birds promptly flew back to their nests in houses all over the Drevlian capital, their newfound flammable cargo setting ablaze the entire city. The residents fled their burning homes in panic, only to be captured by Olga, who was waiting in ambush, and then either put to the sword or sold into slavery. In a series of devious plots, Princess Olga had outwitted and destroyed the Drevlians who had slaughtered her husband, thus completing her vengeance and securing the throne for her young son. Number 1. The Mongol conquest of Khwarezmia. Taking place between 1219 and 1221, the Mongol conquest of Khwarezmia was a bloodbath made even more tragic by the fact that it could have been avoided. The rapid growth of both the Mongol and Khwarezmid empires resulted in both civilizations finding themselves sharing a land border for the first time. Each side knew little of the other, however it seems as though Genghis Khan had little interest in fighting the Shah of Khwarezmia, with Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad himself otherwise occupied with his own rivalries in the Islamic world. At this time the Mongols were engaged in conquests in China in the east, and so it seems unlikely that the Great Khan would have had plans for a second war in the west, at least not until all opposition in China had been quelled. This is especially true when you consider that the Khwarezmid Empire was a significant power in its own right. Spanning the lands around modern-day Iran, the empire was extremely wealthy and fielded a powerful army. Genghis Khan seemed to recognize this fact, even going so far as to offer peace and a trade agreement, and he sent the Shah a message stating, "I am the master of the lands of the rising sun, while you rule those of the setting sun," indicating he believed that the west belonged to the Shah and the east to the Mongols, and that the two empires and their rulers were equals. Shah Muhammad initially agreed to this treaty, however he remained highly suspicious of these upstart Mongols in the east, and he had received reports of their ruthless and barbaric behaviour in China. Unfortunately for Shah Muhammad and his people, the peace would not last. The Mongols sent a trade caravan to the city of Otrar, consisting of 500 merchants and diplomats, in order to further cement ties between the two empires. However, in a brazen attempt to line his own pockets, the governor of Otrar made the fatal mistake of arresting the 500 Mongols and seizing their trade goods, justifying his provocative actions by accusing the men of being spies. This act of war was relayed to the Great Khan, who decided to give the Shah a chance to redeem himself and thus prevent a full-scale war. A second delegation was sent by Genghis Khan, this time directly to the Shah himself, demanding that the governor be punished for his actions and the 500 men of the initial trade caravan be returned unharmed. Shah Muhammad's response would not only seal his own fate, but also doom millions of his own countrymen to death and result in the complete destruction of his empire. In what must go down as one of the gravest errors of judgment of all time, the Shah beheaded the Muslim interpreter sent by the Khan, shaved off the beards of the two Mongol diplomats accompanying him, and executed the 500 prisoners from the seized trade caravan. After all, what threat could these savages from the east, who live in felt huts, possibly pose to the mighty Khwarezmid Empire? In the face of such provocation, there could be only one response. The Shah and his people were about to experience the wrath of the Mongols in a war of revenge which would become legendary for its sheer brutality. In 1219, as many as 100,000 Mongols invaded, tasked with hunting down the Shah and destroying his armies, which numbered as many as 400,000. The Mongols split their army into two. One army was given the task of destroying any and all resistance, while the other was sent to hunt down and execute the Shah himself, forcing him to flee for his life in his own lands, no doubt leaving the man humiliated and enraged. What followed in the following 2 years was a terrifying glimpse into the Mongol operations that would be unleashed on many other areas of the world. By the fall of 1219, Genghis Khan had arrived at the city of Otrar, ready to extract revenge upon the greedy governor whose actions had caused the war. After a 5-month siege, the Mongols finally captured the city, killing many of its inhabitants and enslaving those that they spared. The governor who had so desired wealth was publicly executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a brutal but perhaps fitting end for a man whose lust for silver had doomed millions to death. At the siege of Bukhara, huge numbers of civilians were executed, enslaved, or drafted into the Mongol army. At the Khwarezmi capital of Samarkand, the Khan attacked, using prisoners captured from previous cities as meat shields to protect his own soldiers from missile fire, killing as many as 50,000 defenders in the ensuing battle. When the city was taken, all civilians were ordered to assemble outside the city, where they were slaughtered like cattle, their severed heads piled into enormous pyramids like some kind of obscene victory monument, which clearly spelled out the fate which awaited any who dared to defy the Great Khan. Similar grisly scenes were repeated at cities all over the empire, most infamously at Urgench, where it was reported that 50,000 Mongol soldiers were given the task of executing 24 citizens each, which, if accurate, would have meant that 1.2 million civilians were murdered in a single massacre of unimaginable proportions. Yet such incredible levels of annihilation were becoming almost commonplace. At the siege of Nishapur, a son-in-law of Genghis was killed in battle. In retribution, every living thing inside the city was put to death, including children, babies, and even dogs and cats, with some estimating that over 1 million were beheaded, their skulls piled into pyramids. Fleeing the Mongol onslaught he had brought down upon himself, Shah Muhammad fled to a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he eventually died a broken man, no doubt cursing the lethal error of judgment he had made just 2 years earlier, and perhaps in a final act of revenge, Khan was even said to have diverted a river through the former emperor's place of birth, thus erasing it from the map forever. By the time the war had ended, the Khwarezmid Empire lay in ruins, with as many as 4 million dead, and the Mongols' path to the Middle East and Europe now open, ensuring that millions more would suffer in conquests yet to come. So those are my choices for 5 of the most incredible and brutal acts of revenge. Let me know in the comments which other revenge stories you would have included in the list, and I'll see you again on the next video.